Hello. Welcome to Shmirchik Fetcher's Corner. Hello. You experience all the unpleasantness that comes with me. Anyway, including sniffing and twitching and itching. Anyway, so we're going to continue on where we left off of the book written by a Christian man. It's called The Anguish of the Jews by Edward H. Flannery, Anti-Semitism. So we'll make it a little bit bigger and then we will go from there. Right? We're up to chapter 3, critical century. Right? So, 1 second. We will go from there. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so let me show you what I'm looking at. So we'll read the book together. Yes. Together in harmony. Harmony. Anyway. Okay. So, a critical century. Right? A critical century. No century was more fateful for Jewish-Christian relations than the 4th century. The Constantinian age was at hand, and the shape that human events were to take for another 1,000 years was rapidly crystallizing. For the Church, it was an hour of triumph, powerful in number and influence. It was now exalted as the Church of the State. Church of the State, right? Let me get my mic over here. And a role in which it exerted a dominant influence on the political and social as well as the religious life. It was a century in ferment. The pens of Saint Jerome, Gregory of Nyssa, John Chrysostom, Ambrose, and Augustine brought the patristic age to full flower. The councils of Nicaea, how do you say that? And Constantinople canonized the essentials of Catholic belief, and the empire split into two. It was also a time of peril for the Church. Christological controversies raged, and whoa. Okay. 1 second. Christological controversies raged. Paganism cast up its final defiance in Julian the Apostate. The barbarians from the north were almost at the gate, and not least Judaism, uncowed, challenged the very foundations of the Church and threatened to undermine it from within. But behind the challenge, Judaism had begun to agonize. Rabbinical learning had departed from Palestine and had found a new center in Babylonia. In the empire, Judaism steadily lost ground in competition for the pagan soul. Under the new Christian empire, its privilege was largely withdrawn. Its proselytism was outlawed. In 425, the patriarchate was abolished. The choice for Judaism was plain: either continue a losing and perilous competition, or retire into the world of the Talmud. The rabbinate opted for the latter alternative, considering it the price of survival, and thus set the pattern of Jewish religious life for centuries. At how high a price, only the future will tell. For Judaism, at all events, the 4th century was a prelude to a millennial misfortune. Wow. So, hi, Alarka D'Souza. I mean, if you're going to ask me a stupid question, I'm obviously not going to answer it. So, fire away, but I'm just probably not going to answer it. Okay. Sorry, I don't mean to be aggressive. It's just, I know, I think I have an idea what the question will be. Okay. The transition from the pagan to the Christian empire was swift, and its consequences for Judaism immediate. In 313, the Edict of Milan conceded toleration to all cults, including Judaism. In 323, the church was accorded a unique position of favor and privilege, and when on his deathbed in 329, Constantine was converted to the church. The imperial government initiated restrictive measures against Jewish privileges and proselytism. By the end of the 4th century, the Jew's civil status was precarious, and his or her image had greatly deteriorated. At the close of the previous century, he or she was no more than a special type of unbeliever. At the end of the 4th, a semi-satanic figure, cursed by God and marked off by the state. So then, by the 4th century, I'm not sure when that is, right? That's when Jews became, like, considered evil, right? So, I want to see, when was the 4th century, right? When was the 4th century? January 1st, 301 AD. So this is already like 2,000 years ago, something like that, right? Okay, this rapid deterioration of the Jewish image and status can be traced to a few causes. The rising tempo of Jewish proselytism and Judaizing in the church was, as we have seen, one of them. The influx of the Roman middle class into the church was another. These converts brought with them the anti-Semitic opinions bequeathed by classical antiquity. A third source may be seen in the rigid verbal method of scriptural interpretation used at the time, which took every unflattering reference to Jews in the Old Testament at face value. A denigration of Jews thus assumed something of a dogmatic character. A fourth and most decisive factor was the full flowering of that theology which laid Jewish miseries to divine punishment for Christ's crucifixion. Like, that to me is the most ridiculous accusation ever. Like, dumb. Like, anybody with half a brain would be like, okay, like, if your God is a God, then how could your God be killed? And even if he chose to be killed, right? If he's a God and he made that choice to be killed and die for your sins, then what are you angry about? In fact, you should thank us. And there have been some Christians that came on my channel and actually thanked us for killing their God, you know? Even though we didn't kill their God, but whatever. It doesn't matter. Facts don't matter, right? Yeah. Okay, I haven't seen these in a while, right? I'm looking at my witchy stuff. I'm looking at my witchy stuff and trying to, like, think how to use it, right? So, continuing on. So there's this. Okay. Anti-Judaic apologists. The foregoing causes reached their full efficacy through the pens and pulpits of many of the fathers and apologists of this and the early 5th century. As paganism died and the Christian heresies waned, these defenders of the church looked more and more upon Judaism as a threat to the faith and the final roadblock to unity. Right. Right. Because, you see, the problem is that, like, if your religion is a spiritual type of religion, you don't feel the need to go and use it for domination. You know, people will find their way to it, you know, without you having to force it on them, right? But the problem is that Christianity recognizes its weakness, and they recognize that a lot of their the church recognizes that a lot of their religion is based off of Judaism, like bashing Jews or stolen scripture. So they need to eradicate Jews and Judaism in order to feel legitimate, right? It's just pathetic. It's weak, right? Yes, right. Okay, so this is also very nice cards. Right? Okay. Very nice. They turned upon the synagogue with the greatest vigor. Generally, they took up the same themes as earlier writers, but felt less need than their predecessors to prove the rejection of Israel and the election of the church, which reality seemed to have confirmed. Still, disturbed by Judaism's durability and the lure it held for many Christians, they set their face to the destruction of Judaic influence. Yeah, this is why Christianity has never been the friend of Jews, even though current Christians today may take a pro-Semitic attitude, right? Still, the church has never been our friend. They resorted to the Old Testament to demonstrate the perversity of the Jew, but the thing is, when they do that, they don't realize that a lot of the Christians of today and the Christians in those times, a lot of their scripture is based off of our Old Testament, but they're going to use our Testament, our Torah, to demonize us, but yet, and to delegitimize us, delegitimize us, right? So, there are lots of sayings in the Tanakh that, say, oh, the Jews sinned, so they took that and used it against us, it seems, right? But the problem is that a lot of their New Testament is based off of our book, right? So, what's the point, right? The point is, what's the point, right? Okay, so they drew upon passages from the prophets, the Psalms of David, and historical books which seemed to support their premise. At first, to convince Jews of the truth of Christian doctrine, gave way for the most part to consigning them the role of obdurate unbeliever doomed to bear witness to the church from without. And in the light of the Jews' continuing dispersion and statelessness, certain New Testament texts which appeared to predict these conditions were reinterpreted to prove the inevitability of divine punishment. This is basically what the Christians still believe today, St. Paul's doctrine was, with rare exceptions, lost from view. And so Paul, it seems, wasn't as crazy as these other saints, right, that wrote all these new texts, all this New Testament garbage, which talks about how Jews are going to be eternally damned if they don't accept Christ, right? It's all made up baloney. In the first half of the 4th century, Eusebius of Caesarea, d. 340, in 2 massive volumes, presented a review of Jewish history found on the distinction between Hebrews and Jews. The Hebrews were considered primitive Christians. Thus, the patriarchs, the Jews, a less worthy people for whom the law of Moses was a necessity. Hilary of Poitiers, D.C. 367, similarly reinterpreted Jewish history for the purpose of proving Jews a perpetually perverse people, despised by God. Here it says, Aphrates, D.C. 345, a Syriac apologist wrote to warn Christians against Judaizing practices, but in a mild vein, even displaying a certain Jewish influence in his own style of presentation. Saint Ephraim, D. from 373, another Syriac, inserted contemptuous references to Judaism in his liturgical hymns, calling the synagogue, for example, a harlot. Can you imagine? This is how they treated us? Right? This is the way they treat human beings, And then they expect us to want to, embrace, why don't you like Christians? Why don't you like Christianity? Hello, we have not a very pleasant history, So, for example, a harlot, a pseudo-Ephraimic writer warned that whoever ate or mingled with the Jews became comrades of the crucifiers. Right. Saint Cyril of Jerusalem, c. 315 to 386, an ardent preacher, denounced the Jews from the pulpit and wrote offensively of the Jewish patriarchate, which he considered a shameful institution. And Saint Epiphanius, from 310 to 403, one of the great early heresiologists, in his analysis of Judeo-Christian heresies, did not hide his feelings for one group, the Herodians, who are real Jews because they are indolent and dishonest. Right, so the Jews are dishonest and indolent, according to these saints, right? In the second half of the century, the crescendo continued. Saint Gregory of Nyssa, from 331 c. to 396, with wanton eloquence, describes the Jews as slayers of the Lord, murderers of the prophets, enemies of God, haters of God, adversaries of grace, enemies of their faith, of their father's faith, advocates of the devil, brood of vipers, slanderers, scoffers, men of darkened minds, leaven of the Pharisees, congregation of demons. Wow. Wow, this is Christianity, my friends. It's so hateful, you know? Very hateful. Brood of vipers, slanderers, scoffers, men of darkened minds, leaven of the Pharisees, congregation of demons, sinners, wicked men, stoners, and haters of goodness. St. Gregory makes it abundantly clear that this century has added a new note of contempt to the Christian image of the Jew. St. Jerome, from 340 to 420, meanwhile, still exemplifies the strange ambivalence that marked Christian attitude at this time, while continuing his personal relations with rabbis and even seeking lessons in Hebrew from them. Wow. So this guy's a hypocrite, right? So this guy, St. Jerome, he is basically cursing Jews out, but then he'll go and learn from rabbis lessons in Hebrew. He upbraids Jews in his writings as serpents, haters of all men, and Judases. Their psalms and prayers, he states, are the braying of donkeys. Sorry, it's funny. And they curse Christians in their synagogues. Christians are not even, like, in our mind, you know? It's like, it's not all about you, you know? IWIS. Yeah. Continuing on, right? Where are we? Where were we? Okay, Chrysostom, the high point. All of this is dwarfed by St. John Chrysostom, from 344 to 407, who up to his time, stands without peer or parallel in the entire literature of Adversos Judaeus. The virulence of his attacks is surprising even in an age in which rhetorical denunciation was often indulged with complete abandon. The chief venting of his ire was 6 sermons delivered in his see of Antioch, where Jews were numerous and influential, and where apparently some of his flock were frequenting synagogues and Jewish homes and probably trafficking in Jewish amulets. The saint was not one to meet such a situation with equanimity. Rigid on principle, a born reformer and fiery preacher, he threw the whole of his energy and oratorical talent into castigating Judaism. How to accomplish it? There was one way: show the Jews and the synagogue in their true colors, engender in Christians a fear and disgust of Judaism that would discourage all desire to Judaize. Of what to accuse the Jews? Of their rapine, their cupidity, their deception of the poor, of thieveries and huckstering. Indeed, a whole day would not suffice to tell all. Chrysostom nonetheless faces up to his task. How can Christians dare have the slightest converse with Jews, most miserable of all men? Homily here is written in 4.1. Men who are lustful, rapacious, greedy, perfidious bandits. And are they not inveterate murderers, destroyers, men possessed by the devil, whom debauchery, drunkenness have given them the manners of the pig and the lusty goat? They know only one thing: to satisfy their gullets, get drunk, to kill, and maim one another. Indeed, so this is all what he wrote, right? Here's the source, 1.4. Indeed, they have surpassed the ferocity of wild beasts, for they murder their offspring and immolate them to the devil. Lies. This is just lies, you know? They are impure and impious. So, like, anyone who's going to come on my channel and say that Christianity is not hateful, I mean, like, thank God I'm fine. How are you? Like, if this is not proof that Christianity is a hateful religion, then what is? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Okay, let's see if I can use my new clip for my hair. Okay, the synagogue. Not only is it a theater and a house of prostitution, but a cavern of brigands, a repair of wild beasts. 6.5. A place of shame and ridicule. 1.3. The domicile. So it's writing all the sources. The domicile of the devil, as is also the soul of the Jews. Written in 1.4 and 6. Indeed, Jews worship the devil. Their rites are criminal and impure. Their religion is a disease. It never ends. Their synagogue, again, is an assembly of criminals, a den of thieves, a cavern of devils, an abyss of perdition. These denunciations, selected from many, convey a notion of Christendom's attack. Yet, all is not invective. These insults interlared large segments of scriptural references and theological reasoning. Behind the invective lies a very clear theology of Judaism. It is this theology, moreover, rather than the vituperation, that inflicted greatest injury on the image of the Jew. Why are Jews degenerate? Because of their odious assassination of Christ. 6.4. This supreme crime lies at the roots of their degradation and woes. 6.1. And for this deicide, Chrysostom declares, there is no expiation possible, no indulgence, no pardon. 6.2. Vengeance is without end. Jews, moreover, will always remain without temple or nation. 6.2. The rejection and dispersion of the Jews was the work of God, not the emperors. It was done by the wrath of God and his absolute abandon of you. Thus, he continues, will Jews live under the yoke of servitude without end. God hates the Jews and always hated the Jews. And on judgment day he will say to the Judaizers, depart from me, for you have had intercourse with my murderers. It is the duty of Christians to hate the Jews. He who can never love Christ enough will never have done fighting against those Jews who hate him. And it continues. This is his writings, this guy, this great saint, right? Flee then their assemblies, flee their houses, and far from venerating the synagogue because of the books it contains, hold it in hatred and aversion for the same reason. 1.5. Chrysostom himself gives the example. I hate the synagogue precisely because it has the law and prophets. I hate the Jews also because they outrage the law. So attempts have been made to explain Chrysostom's fury, or rhetorical exaggeration, genuine alarm at the extent of Judaizing among his flock, a faulty use of Old Testament metaphors and symbols, the impact of Julian, the apostates, seemingly miraculous failure to rebuild the Temple of Jerusalem. 6.1. Faulty applications of Old Testament denunciations of Israel and equally faulty interpretation of many New Testament texts seemingly concerned with the destiny of the Jews. Such are some of the attenuations proposed to rationalize his onslaught. They fall short of their task. Christians as well as Jews can only deplore these sermons as a grave lapse from charity and common justice. Chrysostom's historical stature as a great churchman, orator, liturgist, and saint cannot spare him a prominent niche in the pantheon of anti-Semitism. The effects of his preaching and his teachings of the deicide accusation wielded a baleful influence not only on the clergy and populace of his time, but on those of centuries thereafter. A generalized popular hatred of the Jew was now underway, and among the literati the tone of Chrysostom's diatribes found an echo in and out of the church for centuries. So here we see the greatest saints that are revered today by the Christians have been the most anti-Semitic and hateful of all. Remember, at least Christians wrote such a book of hate, yeah. You know, like, even as I read this, I'm like, oh my god, like, these Christians are vile. Like, these saints, they're so hateful. Like, listen, I get it. You want to discredit, like, these Christian people, like, these Christian saints. They want to discredit Judaism. Do it in another way, you know? Or just leave Jews alone, you know? Make your own religion and, you know, not based off of other people. And then you have a chance to flourish. No, but, no. They have to basically trash the Jews. Like, that's what it's about. It's like, seriously? Like, that's what it's about? Like, come on, man. Like, but then again, Islam is no better, so the two of the worst religions. And they call it Abrahamic, you know, there's nothing, well, yeah, it's a little bit, there's nothing really Abrahamic about Islam or really Christianity. Yeah, today they do. Today they admit the fault, but like, how can anybody, in my view, how can anybody be part of a religion which did so much damage to a people, and how could they accept a doctrine written by these very saints who damned the Jews, right? And they wrote the other doctrines as well for the Christians. And how can anybody accept a religion which is just based off of, like, trashing Jews? It's like literally hate on Jews. Like, if you see fault in the church, right? Because it's created, the church is following the creation of a few hateful bigots, men who created this religion. Why follow this type of religion if you're aware that the founders of the religion were hateful bigots? You know what I mean? Like, find a different religion. In my view, you know, like, come on. That's just the way I see things. When you say that now, you're proselytizing. No. Find a different religion. I mean, like, obviously Judaism will reject you if you try to be Jewish. They'll say, go find a different religion or follow the 7 laws of Noah. But go become a Hindu, you know? Become a Hindu. Like, there's so many other religions out there. I don't know. Go find your own spirituality. But then again, people really believe this, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is their religion. So, you can't take it away from them. It's emotional. So, I guess the best that we can hope for in Christianity is for them to just acknowledge the past mistakes, and for them to just stay nice and peaceful, right? Without trying to continue erasing Judaism by proselytizing, right? That's the least they can do to basically to repent from the ways of the church, you know. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Do you know what I mean? Like, the theory of the witness people. Okay, so then there's like this whole sect, I think, from what I understand, is there's the Christians, they call themselves like the witness of the what do they call them? They're whole other, like, Saint Augustine, from 354 to 430, a contemporary of Chrysostom, presents an ambivalence towards Judaism. Faithful to the Pauline tradition of special affection for the Jews, he is at the same time at a loss to understand their unbelief, their animosity towards Christians, and their unending misfortunes. Thus, he often addresses them in severe terms. Too urbane and aware of human weakness to hate or indulge in vituperation, he gives vent to intellectual passion. A first part of his theology of Judaism is common to that of the other fathers. Judaism, since Christ, is a corruption. Indeed, Judas is the image of the Jewish people. Their understanding of the scriptures is carnal. They bear guilt for the death of the Savior. I tell you, they can't get over it. For through their fathers they have killed the Christ. In one of his sermons, he exclaims, "The Jews held him The Jews insulted him. The Jews bound him. They crowned him with thorns, dishonored him by spitting upon him. They scourged him. They heaped abuses upon him. They hung him upon a tree. They pierced him with a lance. It is clear, according to Augustine, that the divine malediction they called upon themselves have been heard. They are destined to be slaves. Augustine's original contribution resides in his theory of the Jews as a witness people, right? So we're gonna stay alive just to witness how bad we were and to be punished for our sin of killing their God, and for witnessing how wrong we were, which is pathetic. You know, like, your whole religion is based off of bashing Jews. Like, get over it. You know, like, I don't know, just, you know, like, go find another, something else to, find a new hobby, you know? Okay. So his thing about Jews as a witness people, a theological construction by which he attempts to solve the apparent dilemma of the Jews' survival as a people and their increasing misfortunes. The role of the Jews, in his opinion, is still providential. They are at once witnesses of the evil and of Christian truth. Testes inquitatis et veritatis nostrae. They subsist for the salvation of the nation, but not for their own. They witness by their scriptures and serve as slave librarian of the church, and likewise they give witness by their dispersion and their woes. Like Cain, they carry a sign, but are not to be killed. Oh, so like, you know, Cain and Abel, right? The two brothers, one of them killed each other, and Cain killed his brother Abel. And so he had a sign on his head so that nobody should kill him or something. So he's comparing us to them. They carry a sign but are not to be killed, Genesis 4:15, as in the scriptures. So in reality, the older brother will serve the younger. So basically, we're the older religion, so we have to serve the Christians. This is his, because the Christian is the younger brother, we're the older, we have to serve the younger brother, the younger religion. If you believe most Christians know about these defamatory and hateful writings, let alone believe in them, you'd be mistaken. I'm sure they don't know every single one, you know, like, I'm pretty sure you're right that they don't know every single one, but from what I understand, like, every time a Christian comes onto my channel and they say something like to disparage the Jews, you know, and to point out how great Jesus was, the only way, hi John W., the only way they actually do that is by proving my point, how hateful the New Testament is, the scriptures, that their example of a just and righteous person in Christianity is Jesus, and how he got tortured by the Jews. I'm telling you, like, every single one of these, like, they throw at me all these scriptures about how the Jews tortured Jesus, and the Jews did this, and they don't even realize how offensive that is, and how anti-Semitic it is by them trying to prove that Christianity is so wonderful and Jesus is amazing by, like, trashing me. You know, like, yeah, that's just, you know, like, you love me? Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you. Like, yeah. And yet, Christians have a duty to love Jews, right? So, we're the older brother serving the younger brother, right? And yet, Christians have a duty to love Jews and to lead them to Christ. And this, right, so this is why the Christians, they make a mistake, you know? Like, this is their whole doctrine, is to blot out Judaism, because you have to convince Jews to be Christian. This is why Christianity is so wrong and evil. In his treatise against the Jews, recalling chapter XI of the Epistle to the Romans, Augustine pursues St. Paul's thought. Jesus and the apostles were Jews. The law of Sinai was from God, and if Israel has been replaced, Jews are still called to repentance and faith in Christ. Thus, he concludes, let us preach to the Jews whenever we can with a spirit of love. It is not for us to boast over them as branches broken off. We shall be able to say to them, without exulting over them, though we exult in God, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord. Right? So, I see, I guess there's, like, two ways to actually hate on the Jews. It's, like, not to hate on the Jews, but, like, to approach Jews. So one of them is to come and be vile towards the Jews and curse the Jews and tell them you're going to hell. And another way for them is to come and say, let us walk in the light of the Lord, right? but both are hateful because you're basically trying to destroy Judaism by convincing Jews to believe in your religion, because you want to be dominant, the dominant religion. You don't want any other religion to exist besides for yours. And it's the same thing with Islam, you know, like, that's why Islam and Christianity are in competition with each other. But sadly, you know, like, Christianity has gone down and Islam has, it's very sad. The whole thing is just, for me, it's, when I think about this type of thing, it's very tragic. Yeah, it's very tragic, the whole thing. It is a misfortune of Christian history that Augustine's admirable reassertion of Paul did not receive the same hearing as his theory of the witness people, which was destined for theological fame and for uses never envisaged by its author. History was to produce many who took their inspiration from this theory and felt justified in assisting the Almighty by aggravating Jewish miseries. Yet it also saved many lives. How did it save many lives? Several minor writings of the 4th and 5th centuries are concerned with Judaism. Two took the form of dialogue. The dialogue of Athanasius and Zacchaeus, a Greek writing, and Evagrius' discussion concerning the law between Simon, a Jew, and Theophilus, a Christian, a Latin work written in the West, probably in Spain. Their tone is earnest and amicable. Evagrius' discussion closes with the lengthy prayer of the newly converted Jew, the following portion of which is of special interest because of its sense of continuity between the old and new covenants. O Lord, or this is their prayer, right? Excuse me. O Lord Jesus, if I'm worthy to have faith, strengthen me also for the knowledge of thyself, for thou showest the way for them that wander, and callest hopes to home the lost, and raiseth the dead, the strengthenest the faithless in their faith, and to the blind thou giveth light into the eyes of their heart. Thou thyself art the holy tabernacle, whose waste with our fathers in the desert, thou our candlestick, thou the golden altar and the shewbread, thou the altar and the willing victim. The text of Sulpicius Severus, a Christian historian, probably writing in Aquitania at the end of the 4th century, is important as a concise formulation of the theme of the punishment of the Jews. Jews are beheld scattered throughout the world, through the whole world, that they have been punished on no other account than for the impious hands which they laid on Christ. Christian charity was not wholly absent from the anti-Jewish literature and of this highly tempered age. Even Chrysostom managed to admit that Jews possessed some moral qualities, and Saint Augustine praised their fidelity to the law. Saint Ambrose, 340 to 397, acknowledged their chastity at a time when Jewish carnality was a stock in trade accusation. And Saint Jerome saluted their generosity. So what is carnality? Feeling morbid sexual desire of a propensity to lewdness. Eroticism, sexiness. What? Like, so he admired their carnality. And Saint Jerome saluted their generosity. Prayers for the Jews in this period continued in an already long tradition in the church. Jesus, who had wept for his beloved people and uttered his Father, forgive them, in which Jews are certainly included, was imitated soon after by Saint Stephen, who died with the same prayer on his lips in Acts 7:60, but by Saint Paul, who offered his own salvation for his kinsmen in Rome 9.3, and by Saint Justin in his dialogue Passim, the Acts of the Martyrs, present examples of martyrs praying during their execution for their Jewish prosecutors. From their Jewish persecutors, right? Such as Paul of Palestine. In Didascalia prescribes the Paschal fast as an intercession for the Jews. In the 4th century, this prayerful tradition continued. So some of the some of the writings of the fathers were of prayers for the Jews because they're so evil, right? So in a way, it wasn't completely hateful, right? Not completely. There's some sort of compassion towards the Jews, you know, in a twisted, weird, perverted way. You know what I'm saying? Hi, Islam is a danger to modern civilization. That's right. My favorite streamer, Jewish princess. Let's get it. Hi, Louise Reyes. How are you? Hope you're up and walking. Okay, so let us pray. Okay, where were we? Okay, so the synagogues are sepulchres in the desert. Let us pray the Lord that these sepulchres rise. And Saint Leo the Great, D 461, he who's crucified by them prayed for them. Let us also, with the blessed apostle Paul, lend our prayers. Juster noticed that these prayers for the Jews decreased with time. Ah, the apostolate of prayer for the Jews did not die completely, but diminished in periods when the Pauline tradition languished, only to enjoy resurgence in modern times, right? So it seems like there was some compassion back then in a twisted way, you know, because to pray for the evil Jews. But then as the years went on, it was like, as the years went on, it got more and more hateful with hateful saints. And in current times today, the Christians return to the old Christian doctrines which pray for the Jews, but it's still anti-Semitic in the way where those old saints from the old times that used to pray for the Jews, it was in a twisted way where they were praying for the evil Jews who do bad things, and that the Jews need to erase Judaism and be Christian with one with them, right? So basically, blotting out Judaism, which that's pretty much what Christianity is today. It's the same as the old, just less violent, you know. Just less violent. It's taken a turn. Do you know what I'm saying? Interesting. From theology to law, right? I don't know why I'm getting all these, like, people are sending me all these stuff in my email, Christian stuff, and I'm like, somebody's spamming me because I put my email in the thing. It's just so funny. It's so funny. It's ridiculous. You know what I'm saying? Somebody, I just sent it to spam, and that's that, you know. Mark as spam. And then you go and send it to spam. No, mark as spam. Mark as spam, yeah. This chutzpah, you know? These Christians don't realize how evil they're being when they try to proselytize Jews, you know? It's just like, as if the Jews haven't gone through enough, you know, like, to come and try to rub salt into our wounds after all that the church has done to us, you know? Like, not only should you apologize for the church, or maybe you don't have to, but you should abandon Christianity, and you should embrace the 7 laws of Noah, and you should stop trying to erase Jews and Judaism, right? It's infuriating. Anyway. Yeah. One more immediate import to the fate of the Jews than the opinions of the apologists and the theologians of the patristic era were the legislative measures taken by both the church and the empire. In a sense, these were the translation into statutory form of what the patristic teachings seemed to call for. Some anti-Jewish legislation by the church could be anticipated, as long as fraternizing among Christians and Jews and Judaizing among Christians were strong. It is not surprising that countermeasures found their way into canons of the church councils. Already the Council of Elvira in Spain, from 306, forbade Jewish-Christian marriages. That's good. Except in the case of conversion of the Jewish party to Christianity, right? It banned close religions between Jewish and Christian communities, and prohibited Jewish blessings in the fields of Christians. The Council of Antioch prohibited the Christians to celebrate the Passover with the Jews, an issue which the General Council of Nicaea had formally decided in 325, but which would not be actually closed for many years. The Council of Laodicea, from 434 to 481, grappled with the problem of Judaizing, apparently acute in the East, forbidding Christians to keep the Jewish Sabbath or to receive gifts of unleavened bread from Jewish festivals and impieties. All in all, the conciliar action of the Church appears restrained compared to the fulminations of some of the fathers. Judaism was left severely alone except in those conditions where the faith of Christians were considered imperiled. What does that mean? The decline of Jewish status under the empire presents a more complex development. The imperial government was now committed to the Church and her teachings, but was also bound to the empire's historical tradition of tolerance and privilege for Judaism. So it seems like, okay, church and state became the same thing. You know, it's basically how Islam is today, where the government is Islamic, run by Sharia law, right? This double commitment was not an easy one to fulfill. So to give Jews privilege and to be committed to the church teaching. The more difficult problem was not how to promote the interests of the church, but rather how to deal with Judaism. The task was facilitated, to some extent, by the common acknowledgement of both church and state that Judaism possessed the right to exist, and thus should enjoy a basic liberty of cult. It was aggravated, on the other hand, whenever churchmen or rulers, indifferent to legal tradition or zealous in combating the Jewish evil, gave short shrift to iniquities of the traditional law. The emperors, in effect, varied greatly in their commitments, whether in promoting Christian interests or protecting Jewish rights. Constantius I, from 305 to 306, though Arian, proved more rigorous in legislating against Jews than did his predecessor. So he was more anti-Semitic. Constantine Theodosius I acquiesced to St. Ambrose's unlawful encroachment on imperial policy. So a lot of them didn't, respect the law. A lot of these people who were in charge at the time, they just, because they didn't like Jews. Arcadius, from 395 to 408, perhaps exasperated by Chrysostom's importunings, exiled him from his see at Antioch. And Julian the Apostate brutally attempted to wrest the empire from its Christian commitments altogether. But the time was not far off when ecclesiastical and imperial legislation concerning Judaism would reflect one another faithfully. Wait, so who is this guy, Julian the Apostate? Let's go check who is this guy. Julian the Apostate. Julian the Apostate. His rejection of Christianity and his promotion of Neoplatic Hellenism in its place. So, he rejected Christianity and okay, so he was an apostate. Fine. Where are we? So, the progress of the imperial legislation may be followed in the Codex Theodosianus, a compilation of all laws enacted from the reign of Constantine until its eventual composition in 438. Numerous statutes of this comprehensive legal corpus treat of Judaism and provide a good index of Judaic-Christian relations in this period in both the Eastern and Western Empire. Though the statutes cannot be precisely systematized, four main categories are discernible: statutes which establish Judaism's basic rights and freedoms, those which prohibit injustices or violence against Jews or their cult, those prohibiting anti-Christian practices by Jews, and those who restrict the Jewish cult and activities, though the last category of restricting Jewish cult and activities, right, of more significance for our subject, comprises a larger part of legislation. Contrary to the impression given by some historians, it is not characteristic of this legislation as a whole. That Judaism remained a religio licita under the Christian empire is clearly set forth in several statutes. Judaism is, we read in the code, not a prohibited sect. It enjoys, in effect, the right of excommunication for its members. Its clergy is entitled to the same privileges as the Christian clergy, and its patriarch is to be granted his accustomed privileges. From this legal status flow certain protections. Jews who conduct themselves peacefully are not to be molested. They are not to be disturbed on their Sabbath and feast days, and their synagogues are not to be attacked, violated, burned, or confiscated. Several statutes, especially in the reign of Theodosius II in the early 5th century, reiterate this injunction. The existence of Jewish and anti-Christian hostility and violence is evinced in several statutes which forbid Jews to stone or use violence against Jewish converts to the church, to interfere with the sacraments, to mock or burn the cross during the Feast of Purim, or to outrage Christianity itself. There can be no question that the Codex throws most of its weight to the service of the Church. Christian proselytism is favored by laws which ban conversions to Judaism. Converts to the synagogue are rendered intestate. What's intestate? It's a very fancy word. I have to go look it up. Intestate. Not having made a will before one dies. So they don't have a will. They're not allowed to have a will. Can you imagine? But converted Jewish children are. So children who are converted to what? Christianity? Conversely, not to be disinherited by their parents. Thus was the law of Hadrian, long in desuetude, reenacted. So, from what I understand from the church, right, is that they had this thing where, like, they would take away Jewish people's inheritance, like, if, somehow, if they do something wrong, like if they convert or whatever, the kids can lose the inheritance from their parents or what not, I don't know. Right? Okay, so thus was the law of Hadrian. Long in its desuetude, reenacted Jewish proselytism was again a criminal act. Outstanding is the statute which permits unwilling Jewish converts to return to their Judaism. So basically Jews that want to convert back to Judaism, right? They can't go back, according to the church. It was really basically they can go back. It was really to be respected by the authorities. All these laws, they could just, whoever was in power could just decide, like, if they hate Jews, then they will be nasty and they won't go according to their laws of, like, protecting the Jews under their doctrine of Christianity, right? Like, oh, you can't burn their synagogues down and kill them, right? A series of progressively rigorous penalties prescribed the circumcision of slaves of Jewish owners. At first, slaves were forfeited. Later, the owner incurred the death penalty and confiscation of goods. And from 384 on, a Jew was forbidden to buy a Christian slave, a prohibition repeated in 423. This apparent necessity of the Jewish resistance to laws concerning slaves and the determination of the empire to enforce them point to a problem with deep social and religious roots. Jews were prominent in slave trading and also engaged in agriculture and industry, which required the use of slaves. Motivated by proselytic zeal and a wish to avoid legal impurity incurred by household contact with the uncircumcised, they were in a habit of circumcising their slaves. The church was naturally alarmed at these losses to the fold. The empire, sharing the worry of the church, determined to put an end to the practice. The grave consequence for Jewry can be understood. Many were forced from agriculture and industry into smaller trades and crafts, but not without strong and prolonged resistance to the slavery statutes. So it seems like everybody who, at the time, they were involved in the slave trade, and everybody was a slave at some point, right? In this era, 2,000 years ago, before Islam, right? Construction and care of the synagogues were submitted to regulation. In 415, Patriarch Gamliel VI was degraded for having constructed a new synagogue without authorization, and it was destroyed. Further laws regulating the matter were enacted twice. In 423, one of them forbidding beautifying or repairing the synagogue without permission. A measure doubtless inspired by aesthetic competition, as well as a desire to render synagogues less attractive to would-be Judaizing Christians. So Christianity needs to degrade Judaism in its entirety. You can't have beautiful synagogues because the church is the only one that's allowed to be beautiful. It's a little bit like Islam, where a church or a synagogue cannot be higher than a mosque, right? It has to be lower. A Jew cannot ride a horse; he has to ride a donkey. A Jew needs to pay jizya, a Christian also, right? A protected, tax for protection, right? And in order to be able to practice Judaism. And in some Christian countries, the Christians made the Jews wear, certain clothes so that they can be identified. And the same within Islam, they did it to the Jews and the Christians. So, it's very interesting, right? Other restrictive legislation known as Privilegia Odiosa curtailed the Jews' civil status. They were barred from public functions like the army, administrative posts, and off and on from the legal profession. Marriages to Jews, seen as shameful and adulterous unions, were prohibited under the penalty of death. Wow. This is Christianity, my friends. And there was no separation between church and state somehow. You know what I'm saying? Hi, Risen Nation. It's very interesting. You know what I'm saying? A law of 397 denied Jews the rights of asylum granted by the church. In the following year, Jewish tribunals, until then competent in all Jewish affairs, were invalidated with respect to all matters not purely religious. In 425, when the Patriarchate was abolished, the tax attached thereto was not abolished, but simply added to the Jews' other taxes. So what's the Patriarchate? See, there's a lot of high language here, which I don't understand really. Patriarchate. An ecclesiological term in Christianity, the designation of the office and jurisdiction. Right, so basically, an ecclesiastical patriarch. So it was all of these, places. So they were to be recognized by the legislation of the Emperor Justinian, who reigned from 527 to 565, later confirmed by the Council in Trullo, 692. These five were Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. And then they abolished that. Whatever. It's too complicated. I just can't do it. Right, okay. Whatever. Continuing on, right? Where are we? Okay, the solidarity of canonical and imperial legislation is obvious. While maintaining the equities of traditional Roman law, the imperial legislation reflected the spirit and often the latter the letter of the canons of the church councils, and in many instances implemented them in the capacity of a secular arm. Many offensive and denigrating references to Jews and Judaism strewn throughout the Codex plainly overflow the purely juridical state of mind, and echo similar terminology in the canons. Judaism is referred to as a wicked sect, a superstition, its congregation as a sacrilegious assembly, and Jews are termed abominable. Christianity is designated as the venerable religion. The ecclesiastical influence was progressive. Simon has noted in the legislation a growing influence of the religious over the political. Popular outbreaks. Okay, so this is going to talk about relations between Christians and Jews and the violence and all that, right? So yeah, it's interesting. Right? Okay. More eloquent from the historian of Judaic-Christian relations than these juridical developments were the violences perpetuated by both Christian and Jew during these years. Hostilities were brutal and frequent. Blow was met by blow in a scandalous reciprocity of provocation. Jews were still accused of undying hatred for Christianity by many leaders and writers of the time. Saint Basil complained that, together with the pagans, Jews fought Christianity. Saint Gregory, Nazianzen, accused them of an inveterate hatred of Christians. Sozomenos, the historian, testified that Emperor Julian believed in the intractable hatred of Jews for Christians. In effect, many reported happenings give substance to the accusation. Jews lived up to their reputation for sedition and tumult. At Caesarea in Palestine, under Constantius, they rose, massacred the Romans, and attempted to extend hostilities throughout Palestine. I mean, we were being occupied at the time, right? But it's still not pretty to do that. And attempted to extend hostilities throughout Palestine. In the reprisal, they themselves were massacred. Oy vey. And this is history, my friends. It's not pretty. And Caesarea and other Jewish cities were destroyed. Under Saint Athanasius, from 293 C to 373, in Alexandria, Jews joined rioting Arians against the saint, who was both a political and religious leader of the city. During Julian's short reign, from 361 to 363, the Jews aided the pagan reaction against the Christian Empire and were accused of burning several churches. They took part in the Persian persecutions of Shapur II, in which Archbishop Simon of Ctesiphon was killed. At Imnestar in 415, according to the historian Socrates, on occasion of a Purim celebration, Jews intoxicated with wine fastened a Christian boy to a cross and abused him until he died. Really? The report raises a question of facticity. Was it merely another ritual murder charge, right? Because this is what we've been accused of for like ages, and they're all false, right? Jester believes it was, right? It's just another blood libel. Or was it a real happening? Parkus sees no reason to doubt the authenticity of the account. A few years earlier, in 408, the Codex had legislated a ban against insults to the cross at Purim, like on our holiday, and against the allowance of the Talmud of heavy drinking on that occasion. A report of drunken rioting and insults to Christ in Alexandria was also made by one chronicler. A Jewish uprising in Alexandria under the patriarchate of Saint Cyril, 414, brought the greatest woe to the Jews. So this is like at a time when like Christianity was really early Christianity, which was basically being like, this is like pretty much after Christianity, like very close to the time when Christianity separated from the synagogue and it became completely for Gentiles, not for Jews. It became completely separate, right? Because the earliest Christians were Jews, right? A Jewish uprising in Alexandria under the Patriarchate of Saint Cyril from 414 brought the greatest woe to the Jews, aroused against a certain Christian schoolmaster. And threatened by Saint Cyril, they killed many Christians. Next day, Christians, encouraged by Saint Cyril, attacked the synagogues and killed as many Jews as they could find. The rest fled to Alexandria, putting an end to the age-old Jewish colony. The Christian record is no more enviable than the Jewish. Parks claims that it is worse. Simon observes that pogroms in this period are no more frequent than in the pagan era, with the exception of the savage murder of Hypatia, famous Jewish Neoplatonist philosopher, by fanatical Christian anchorites near Alexandria in 415. Christian anti-Jewish activities were limited to attacks on synagogues, and these were numerous. Against the attacks, the law seemed impotent, right? So they weren't allowed to attack the synagogue, but they would do it all the time, the Christians, it seems. It seemed like early Christianity was still, like, figuring itself out, right? The saints were deciding who Jesus was, like, all these, like saints, right? They didn't know who he was, they didn't know what they stood for, they made it all up, you know? Then they expect people of the book to go and to basically abandon their old book that they know as the truth, that's the original, for some new fabricated, made up book that they're arguing over, because they all, like, were making up ideas about who Jesus was. Was he God? Was he son of God? Who was his mother? Was she a hoe? No. Was she a holy virgin birth? Like, they didn't know. They made it up, you know. So the law against attacking synagogues was impotent. Like, nobody cared for it. From 373 to 423, no less than 6 laws were enacted against such violations. Perhaps the most extraordinary and significant assault was that of Callinicus. See, so, like, all these names, right, they're all Greek, and this is, like, in the ancient times, you know, like, this is when, like, Christianity was separating from the synagogue and becoming completely Goyish, right? And then it seems like Jews still had the fighting spirit, you know, before it was squashed out by the church completely. Right? So the assault was that of Callinicus in Mesopotamia in 388, where a Christian mob led by the bishop burned the synagogue. The Emperor Theodosius ordered the synagogue rebuilt by the bishop. The incendiarists punished. Saint Ambrose intervened with a letter to the emperor. So this was, like, still when the Greeks were emperor, you know, in which he was vehemently chastised, in which he chastised the emperor for favoring the synagogue, a home of unbelief, a house of impiety, a receptacle of folly. Laws that protect them, the letter stated, are wrong and should be annulled or disobeyed. The only reason he himself, Saint Ambrose, did not burn the synagogue of Milan, he said, was because he was remiss. What does that mean, remiss? What's remiss? Remiss. Lacking care, attention. Oh, he was negligent. He wasn't zealous enough to do it, right? Nice guy. Nice guy. Yeah. Okay, so and he certainly would have done so if he had known he would be punished by the law of the empire. The imperial power, Ambrose asserted, must be used in the service of the faith. The emperor threatened in the cathedral itself was with refusal of the sacraments ceded to Ambrose, annulled his order, and thus lapsed into civil illegality by accepting the latter's principle of the precedence of religious over civil law. So, it's okay to attack synagogues. The attacks continued in both provinces of the empire. In Dortona, Italy, with encouragement from the bishop, the synagogue was destroyed and replaced by a church. In Tipasa, in Africa, the synagogue was seized and turned into a church. In Rome, the synagogue was destroyed, but it was ordered rebuilt by Maximum, an action to which St. Ambrose accredits the emperor's eventual downfall. Oh, so because he rebuilt the synagogue, that's why he eventually lost his crown. At Antioch, the tomb of Maccabees, with their relics, was converted into a church. In Edessa, a synagogue was seized. The bishop participating in Magona Minorca on the occasion of the feast of Saint Stephen, a riot broke out during which the synagogue was burned. About this time, Theodosius II, from 408 to 50, ordered the restoration of the confiscated synagogue, but was strongly reprimanded by Saint Simon Stylites. So you see, if the Jews, in my view, would attack Christians, it was because Christianity was trying to get rid of Judaism and Jews, right? But here it seems like a lot of the dominant violence is toward Jews. As time went on, it just became one-way street towards violence. It wasn't a two-way street. It became just violence, Christians on Jews. Right? About this time, Theodosius II. Okay, so in Magona Minorca, on the occasion of the feast of Saint Stephen, a riot broke out during which the synagogue was burned. About this time, Theodosius II, from 408 to 450, ordered the restoration of a confiscated synagogue, but was strongly reprimanded by Saint Simon Stylites. It was also the time that a group of monks in Palestine under Bar Sauma, who in his youth had been hurt by the Jews, roved through Palestine, attacking synagogues and occasionally massacring Jews. Relations of Christians and Jews on the popular level present a confusing picture. That some degree of popular hostility toward Jews existed can be concluded from the attacks on the synagogues, which could not have been instigated by mere ecclesiastical fiat without a response of anti-Jewish feeling in the populace. On the other hand, it is certain that popular sympathy and respect for the Jews did exist. Judged by the persistent worry of both priests and rabbis, the social relations of both peoples must have been too close for their liking. Jews did not differ greatly from their neighbors in occupation, although it was in this period that the accusation of Jewish addiction to commerce and cupidity originated. What's cupidity? Cupidity. Greed. Oh. Right? Okay. Saint Jerome and Ambrose, Christendom and Cyril of Alexandria made the first accusations, but it does not seem that a disproportionate number of Jews were as yet in commerce or money lending. The patristic accusations are found in polemic writings written from an aesthetic point of view. Still, Jews were henceforth found in commercial enterprises in increasing proportions. The choice was only partly theirs. The slavery laws, curial charges, exclusions from functioning in government, the army, and the legal profession, as well as incurrence of special taxes, all forced them towards commerce. Moreover, these competence in this field was greatly facilitated by their international connections in the diaspora. Right, so because Jews were all over the world, right? Identification of Jewry with commerce and finance was nonetheless still several centuries off. By the middle of the 5th century, the transformation of the Jewish status was complete. The struggle with the church was lost, and Hellenistic trends in Judaism were defunct. The national and cultural center was now in Babylonia, and the patriarchate was gone. So the patriarchate is the emperor, Christian people ruling from a few countries, I think, from what I understood before, right? In the eyes of the church, the Jew was a guilty Latin unbeliever, resistant to grace, and a destroyer of souls. To the empire, he was still a citizen protected by law, but not merely tolerated as a second-class citizen. Before this menacing situation, Judaism was faced with a critical alternative. Further struggle with its committant risk of extinction, or withdrawal into itself, whereby its spirit could be preserved, and the world outside more or less ignored. The Talmud, the Babylonian part of which was now being set in writing, became the very heart and soul of Judaism. Graetz, commenting on this period, says, "For more than 1,000 years, the external world, nature and mankind, powers and events, were for the Jewish nation insignificant, non-essential, and a mere phantom. It's a ghost. The only true reality was the Talmud." Right, so this is at the time when, like, in this era, right, when, like, Judaism just stopped trying to fight for proselytizing or anything and just go into itself and preserve itself, right? Because if we didn't do that, then there's threat of extinction, right? Jewish propaganda and proselytism never fully disappeared, but circumscribed by Talmudic directives, it was thereafter only half-hearted as well as unsuccessful. That's interesting, because I want to know when it became, like, outlawed, like, for Jews, like, because, like, if people want to convert to Judaism, like, they're discouraged strongly by the rabbis. A new era in the history of Judaism was opening. Christian anti-Semitism. So then I think from here on, that's when Christianity became really, really hateful, like, in action towards the Jewish community, right? Christian anti-Semitism. Did a Christian anti-Semitism exist in the patristic age? Who can deny it? There appeared in this age and thereafter an animus and violence against Jews that breaks the bounds of theological or apologetical disagreement, even of the most fervid kind, but that cannot escape the most restricted definition of anti-Semitism. Lovsky, a theologian of orthodoxy, who has deeply pondered Christian anti-Semitism, leaves no doubt. In a final analysis, there can be no debate. There are too many signs that stake out the permanence, the importance of, and gravity of Christian anti-Semitism. Contempt, calumnies, animosity, segregation, forced baptisms, appropriation of children, unjust trials, pogroms, exiles, systematic persecutions, thefts, and rapine, hatred, open or concealed, social degradation. Yeah. The 4th century demonstrates convincingly that there is a certain boundary, often difficult to locate, across which Christian theological anti-Judaism is transformed into Christian anti-Semitism. In other words, the principal source of Christian anti-Semitism was the Church's theological anti-Judaism. It is apparent that there exists a certain level of theological negation or polemic intensity which, when reached, produces an effect that is no longer purely theological or polemical. Ideological opposition has turned to hatred and stereotype. The lifeblood of anti-Semitism, an example of this, may be taken from the transformation of the initial polemic, which held that Judaism was no longer God's vessel of salvation, and because of its infidelity, was replaced by the Church, into the view that Jews, wicked and despicable, were unworthy and rejected of God from the beginning. Thus were Jews not only wrong, but evil. An ethnic note has been added to the original anti-Judaism. So because the Church decided that not only were Jews, like, bad because God rejected them and because we were cheated on God, right? Therefore, right, Jews have been wicked from the beginning, and they've been replaced by the church. And Jews were unworthy and rejected of God from the beginning. And we're just a bad people, right? Those are Jews not wrong but evil. An ethnic note has been added to the original anti-Judaism. The most ominous development in this crucial century was, without question, the definitive elaboration of the theme of divine curse and punishment upon Jews for their role in the crucifixion of Christ, the deicide accusation, yeah. So this is basic Christianity, which was basically made up by a bunch of saints, like so-called saints of the church. They wrote about it, they made it up to try to basically like delegitimize Judaism, and at the same time it was like, it's very hateful, right? A line of distinction between professed Christians and the ungodly is now hardly distinguishable. Church members love what the world loves and are ready to join with them. And Satan determines to unite them in one body and thus strengthen his cause by sweeping all into the ranks of spiritualism. Whatever you say. Okay, so broached in Saint Justin's dialogue in the 2nd century and repeated in the 3rd century, it was fully elaborated in the 4th, mainly by Chrysostom. Judaism's rapidly deteriorating socio-political situation seemed to lend weight to the opinion that Israel's rejection as the vessel of salvation entailed as punishment an endless dispersion amid punitive conditions. It was forgotten or ignored that the Jewish dispersion began many centuries before Christ, and that Palestine was never completely emptied of Jews. That's true too, right? So basically, after the first temple was destroyed, Jews were dispersed throughout the world, and some of them stayed outside of Jerusalem, and some of them came back. They returned to rebuild the 2nd temple, right? So, and Israel was never completely emptied of Jews, right? There were always Jews living here. They're called Yerushalmis. Chrysostom, whose influence was great, made the deicidal theme central to his theology of Judaism. Right? That's why we have regular Christians today that come and accuse Jews of killing their God. Like, it makes no sense, but listen, that's part of their accusations against us, right? Made up by this guy, Chrysostom, right? Papists who boast of miracles of a certain sign of the true church will be readily deceived by this wonder-working power, and Protestants, having cast away the shield of truth, will also be deluded. Yeah, this is your beliefs, right? Like, it's funny because, like, there's so many different kinds of Christians, but the basic, like, the people who believe in, like, the, like, Candace Owen beliefs, like the, what do you call them? Catholics. They believe that anybody who's not like them is not Christian, right? The Protestants believe that you guys are not like them. Like, you guys are fighting, you can't make up your mind, right? And it's all written in your books, right? In such a way that it's written so brilliantly that you can both basically demonize everybody and everything, you know? You could demonize other Christians, you could demonize Jews, and I mean, I don't know what you're getting at, right? Like, I'm guessing you're Catholic and you think that Christians that are Protestants are not Christians, you know? But it's all good, you know, like, whatever. Fight it out. Fight it out, okay? He was greatly impressed by Julian the Apostate's failure to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem in 363. Okay, so, yeah, so Julian the Apostate was somebody who was Christian, and then he became ex-Christian. So they call him Julian the Apostate. But what was his involvement in the trying to rebuild the Holy Temple in Jerusalem in 363? This event, reported by historians of the time, often in terms of miracle, he interpreted as a direct intervention of God to perpetuate Judaism's punishment and to fulfill New Testament prophecies. Okay, from this point, the theme of deicide gained wide currency, and although never accepted as a universal creedal tradition in the Church, it gained universal acceptance and lived on as a sort of socio-theological corollary of the Church's Christology. Down to the 20th century, it was to supply a pseudo-theological basis for myriad oppressions and degradations of the Jews. Multitudes of misguided Christians considered themselves called to assist the Almighty in effectuating his curse on Jews, free to indulge their hostilities with a divine seal of approval. Right, so basically, because, the Christians created such a hateful, they wrote all, this guy named, what's his name, Chrysostom, he wrote so much hate against Jews, and all the saints were so hateful, that a lot of the Christians, they took it as their duty to basically kill us, right? Despite its venom and its ethnic quality, Christian anti-Semitism retained its basically anti-Judaic, its theological character. On baptism, Jews were welcomed enthusiastically into the fold. Its fundamentally theological character, as well as that of the legislation of the time, is perhaps best known in the relatively better position conceded to Jews in contrast to heretics. Parks is explicit. Certainly, so far as the 4th century is concerned, it was better to be a Jew than a heretic. Anti-Jewish laws were dictated as much by general conceptions as well as by specific hatred of the Jews, and even showed the Jew to be less hated than the heretic. Really? So the heretic is somebody who goes out of Christianity, who is considered a heretic, right? Who's a heretic in Christianity? Someone who differs in belief from defined dogma. So if someone believed that Christ was just a man or was some other created being, he would be a heretic. Okay, so that's why, I think the Protestants, they don't really believe that he's a god, they just believe he's a Messiah. So then the Protestants are considered heretics to the church. So funny. Okay. Parks is explicit. Certainly, so far as the 4th century is concerned, it was better to be a Jew than a heretic. Anti-Jewish laws were dictated as much by general conceptions as by specific hatred of the Jews, and even showed to the Jews to be less hated than the heretic. In truth, heretics had no protection. Jews enjoyed a measure of legal protection, and their sacred books were respected. This preferential treatment could be partially explained as merely a derivative of Augustine's theory of the Jews as witness people, destined to subsist in testimony to the truth of the Church, but not adequately. This theory was fully evolved only with Augustine. A century after the legislation of the Church and the Theodosian Code had begun to protect and curb Jewish rights, there seems no sufficient reason to doubt the motives supplied in the Codex for Judaism's privileges. Respect for Judaism, a concession of tolerance. The antiquity of Jewish privileges, the witness people theory, was a theological instrument constructed tardily to account for the worsening of Judaism's status that paralleled the rise of the Church in the 3rd and 4th centuries. A theory that certain scriptural texts seem to confirm. It is more plausible to see in the preferential treatment the influence of the original Pauline tradition of Judaism's special status. There were secondary causes of the emergence of Christian anti-Semitism at this time. Pagan anti-Semitism was one of them. Brought into the Christian community by pagan converts, it helped to infect the original anti-Judaism with the anti-Semitic virus. Its face, however, changed as old charges appeared in new settings. Jews were what the pagan author said they were, but for different reasons. Pogroms took the form of attacks on synagogues. Jewish impiety or atheism was now their rejection of the church. Their hatred of mankind became hatred of Christians. Occasionally, a verbatim repetition occurs, as when Chrysostom describes Jews in terms of Claudius' letter to the Alexandrians as the pests of the universe. Pagan anti-Semitism was at this point in its death throes, almost completely submerged in a new and more virulent anti-Semitic strain, right? So the pagans at the time didn't like Jews. There was a time when, like, pagans who, like the polytheists who believed in other gods, they didn't like the Jews, but here it's being replaced by Christianity. Christian anti-Semitism was rooted, finally, in the survival of a vibrant and often defiant Judaism. The refusal of the synagogue to join the church stood forth as a serious challenge to the Christian apologia, a scandal to the Christian faith and a source of worry to their pastors. Alarmed by the Judaizing tendencies within their flocks, anti-Semitism thus was not rooted only in Christian doctrine, but also in a pastoral zeal, which resorted to every and any means to find, in Simon's description, a therapy for the Jewish disease. So it's no surprise, like, Christianity is anti-Semitic. Like, in their churches, they just, like, the pastors are basically giving sermons about the evil Jews for therapy, like to make himself feel better. It is not possible, in fine, to assume a certain inevitability affecting this conflict, which engaged these two faiths, laying claim to exclusive election by the one true God, and using the same source of revelation to uphold their claim. At all events, the die was cast. As the 5th century moved in, Judaism's horizons were ominously overcast. They were so to remain for a long time before the storm. Then there was the Middle Ages, right? Yeah, the Dark Ages, shifting fortunes. Right? Wait, go back. Restore. Wait, go back. What was it? Go back. Excuse me. We're up to page 66. Why would it just disappear like that? That's so rude. Page 60. What? No. Sorry, no. That's not how it works. Shifting fortunes, right? So then it's not limited preview. I have the full thing. I have it. Let me check that I have it. Yeah, I have it bookmarked. Okay, thank God. Because, I can't. Yeah, history is very interesting, right? So we're up to that, and we have another 300 pages to go. Yeah, pretty much 300 pages to read, right? So that's that. Okay, where are we? Yeah, so anyway, thank you guys for watching. Thank you for not watching. Thank you for subscribing. Thanks for not subscribing. Thanks for liking. Thanks for not liking. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time.